Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., recording on the afternoon of Friday, the 18th of July, 2014. We're approaching the 100th anniversary of the first declarations of war in World War I. Those occurred on the 28th of July. That was also the date the British mobilized in advance of any great power by mobilizing their fleet, what they had that counted. And they did it on July 28th, exactly 1 month after the Sarajevo incident. And, of course, the stuff we're going to talk about today, bear in mind what I've told you in previous weeks about that guy, Charles Norman, the British Independent Labour Party official and journalist, who tells us that on the Sunday of June 28th, 1914, going around central London, various British bigwigs were asking him, is there any news yet from Sarajevo? Is there any news yet from Sarajevo? Concerning the conceptual framework, I also strongly recommend go immediately to tarpley.net, and there you have a package. You have a lecture that I gave at a conference in 1995, almost 20 years ago, but the research is valid. Take a look at it. Edward VII and his Freemasonic networks, his international Freemasonic networks, reaching from Theodore Roosevelt in the United States, across Britain, France, Italy, Russia, all the way to Marquis Ito of Japan, and how that helped to get World War I going. Indeed, indispensable to get World War I going. And I'm sure there are other people who actually belong to these networks. It's just a matter of research. Quite a few doctoral dissertations, gang, if you want to get in there and start documenting that stuff. The idea, I think, is clear. So now the question, of course, remains, are we in July 1914? And we've got lunatics running around at the same scale or greater, and of course greater because today's weapons are greater. Samantha Power, her loopiness, the mentally unstable passionaria of humanitarian bombing, the woman who has weaponized human rights as an aggressive weapon in the arsenal of imperialism. Sam Power says this morning, this Friday, the 18th of July, that there's no doubt it's the Ukrainian separatists, those evil characters. They're the ones who shot down the Malaysian airliner. With this, she joins in probably the 8th or 9th circles of hell the perpetrators of July and August of 1914. We'll talk about them. Count Berchtold might be a good guy for today, since we're talking about investigations. This would be, if you send out Samantha Power to speak for your government, this would be in 1914. This would be like sending out Rasputin to speak for the Imperial Russian government, which he ran behind the scenes. You could have Madame Blavatsky speak for the French government. Aleister Crowley speak for the British government, right? In other words, notorious kooks, loony birds, crackpots. But there's the way it is. Samantha Power should not be over there at, Turtle Bay, Kips Bay, whatever it is, on the East River. Sam should be in Creedmoor or Bellevue. That should be her winter home in Bellevue and her summer palace out on the island at Creedmoor. So the lunatics have taken over. I urge people, get a hold of yourself. This is the time for clear thinking and, above all, timely, effective, relentless, energetic action to stop monstrosities that are now clearly outlined in the mist ahead of us. If you want to motivate yourself, get that movie The Day After. Get that The Day After, ABC 1984, Jason Robards. In The Day After, you will be amazed at how many geographical similarities and propinquities we have to the current crisis, because the whole thing starts with a crisis around Berlin, the Autobahn, the German border, DDR, and the rest of it. Couple of 100 Ks, 500 Ks, whatever it is, to the southeast, you're going to get into the heart of where we are now. And this is not good. Now, I urge you to look at the Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. When there's a crisis, you should always turn to the Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. And this has all the detailed information. I'm not sure I can repeat every piece of information about this, but it's all documented. It is reasonably comprehensive there on Twitter. So if you haven't subscribed to that, man, you should subscribe now. Now the immediate question: what's the motive? Why have this, and why now? Well, clearly, NATO intelligence, U.S. CIA, UK MI6, French DGSE, Italians, Spanish, whatever, most likely involved. This is principally the response to the creation of the BRICS Bank. The casus belli here is the BRICS Bank, the Fortaleza Summit. Don't ever forget this connection. All the details on Ukraine, we'll get to some. We'll get to the critical ones, and the rest of them are on Twitter. Those are important to be able to knock down reactionary, warmonger, neocon, humanitarian bomber arguments, but principally the BRICS Bank. It is the first systematic challenge to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank since their creation in 1944. Now, those institutions were always rotten. If Roosevelt had lived longer and not been assassinated by the Sir William Stevenson man called Intrepid and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Roald Dahl spy ring, if Roosevelt had survived, the IMF, I think, would have been a lot better. But under Truman, meaning under Dean Acheson, Averell Harriman, Clark Clifford, Skull and Bones, under Truman, it's obvious that the Bretton Woods institutions were already perverted. Even so, they worked well for a good 25 years, better than any world system before or since. But the first challenge to the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, the dollar, and to the system of privately controlled central banks, either privately owned, which is debatable in some cases, but in any case, privately controlled. Central banks that serve bankers, a bank for banks. That's not what we need. We need a national bank. In other words, a bank for the nation, for all relevant economic interests, be it labor or manufacturing or the farmer or universities or scientific research or healthcare. All of that has to be brought in as a national bank. So that is what we get from Fortaleza. We've been waiting for this for quite a while. This has been long in the works. It is unfortunately not as big as it might have been, but under these conditions, we're going to take it. So the Fortaleza Brazil Conference of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa is a turning point in modern world history. And, of course, this is the kind of thing that sends the City of London and the Wall Street finance oligarchs into hysterics, into flights forward. That is what we are seeing. It was a time clock, right? You could set up a stopwatch. Once the BRICS Bank had been announced, it was likely that something like this would happen in the short term. And here it is, less than 1 year after Ghouta, Syria chemical weapons hoax, yet again an attempt for a general war. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C., 18th of July 2014. On the brink. Is it July 1914? It may be. What are you going to do about it? Time to mobilize. We have candidacies. We have all kinds of things. You can join. Governor of New York, Senator from Nebraska. We'll have other things that you can take part in. Get on Twitter. fight the good fight, go into the blood and sand of the arena and fight those warmongers and merchants of disinformation. Go and you can give your candid opinion about Samantha Power. She is, by the way, in the U.S. defense establishment, proverbial as a loopy, insane person. You can read this, Michael Hastings, The Commanders, right? The guy got killed. One of the things he catalogs is that all kinds of generals think that Samantha Power is nuts, and they don't want to be controlled by her. That also came to the fore in the Syria crisis. Now, 1 year ago, you were almost burned, right? You were almost burned, and you were almost burned by those tapes. Later, when we had time, we had Mother Agnès Mariam Delacroix, and we tried to sponsor her trip here as much as we could. We tried to help her along when she made her U.S.-Canada tour last November, December. And then we had Seymour Hersh come online, right, with two articles, one at the beginning of this year and then one in the springtime. It's all a fraud. The whole Ghouta chemical weapons, this was a fraud. Now, you got to learn something here. It's time to take off the blinders, take off the goggles. And in particular, they tried to start a general war last August, September, and now we've got another attempt at a general war. You can see it coming. So you mobilize now. Don't wait for me to be proved right. The point of this stuff is not to prove how smart I am. I already have proved that. The point is to stop these events from happening. That's the interesting proposition. And, of course, in the course of that, many times your predictions, if that's what they are automatically proved wrong. Good. Bring it on. That's the goal. So here's what it is now. The goal of this is obviously to gin up a new phase against Ukraine. Why now? Well, really two reasons. One we've just mentioned in outline, the BRICS Bank. $50 billion now available for infrastructure and hard commodity development. By the way, not sustainable development. Not sustainable at all in the way they mean it. That woman, that heroin addict on one of the international cable TV shows, right, the one with the dark circles, Punk Rock News or whatever she is, that stuff that she talked about is complete baloney. She has no idea. This is going to be infrastructure. Just look at the Russian-Chinese deal, $500 billion, $600 billion worth of gas and infrastructure. I don't know whether they think that's sustainable. Usually they want to see solar cells and some old windmills and maybe some biogas, right? Some flatulence. But no, this is real hard commodity, heavy industrial development. And this $50 billion now, there's also a $100 billion currency stabilization fund. Now, that is really understandable in the sense that these countries now are likely to face Anglo-American panic runs on their currencies. The rupee, the ruble, the renminbi, if possible. The Anglo-Americans, using credit default swaps, will attempt to attack the currencies of these countries. And therefore, it's good to have $100 billion. That helps to a significant degree in trying to defend your currency against the inevitable attacks coming from London and Wall Street. So $50 billion for investments, $100 billion for currency defense. This drives the Anglo-Americans nuts. And as if that weren't enough, we've also got these contributing things, right? The things that Obama actually talked about in his appearance, not today, Friday, but earlier this week on the 16th of July. He talked about the question of Iran, right? Will there be some conflict with Iran? But especially the question then of Syria, right? The Anglo-Americans are freaking out over the inauguration of Assad for a third term. Oh, my gosh. And all this ISIS, right? The ISIS seems to have disappeared from the front pages. Assad's got his new term in office. We congratulate him. We think that's the best solution available for the Syrian people by far. And what are you going to do? It's a contest between Assad and chaos, or better yet, Assad and the Nusra Front, Assad and ISIS, Assad and Islamic Front, and all those people from the Free Syrian Army. They're all now relaxing in hotels across Western Europe and the Gulf. They don't exist anymore. There are no moderate rebels. There never were. And remember, the Muslim Brotherhood terrorist destabilization of Syria goes back decades, as was usefully pointed out by some media this week. There had been a multi-decade campaign to use Islamist terrorists against the neo-Nasserite government of Assad, and especially of the current Assad, Bashar. This has been going on for a long time. So don't say that those first demonstrations in February and March of 2011 were purely peaceful. They were not. They were films of people from the Ikhwan, the Muslim Brotherhood, firing pictures, firing pistols. So all of that in the background, the inability to start a war in Syria, the coming of General Sisi and his nationalist forces, neo-Nasserist forces in Egypt. And don't tell me that Tony Blair changes the picture, right? You want to hire Tony Blair as an economic advisor, that can be pure deception. What, do you think you're going to really get economic advice from Tony Blair? Does he really know anything? You think Sisi is that dumb? I think that's a fig leaf. I think that's a deception posture. People, don't be so Pavlovian in your reactions. Wait for something to actually happen, or get on the internet and denounce Tony Blair, not Sisi. So all of this going on, right? Anglo-American elites absolutely freaked out, and then towards beginning to middle of this week, it became clear that the Ukrainian army offensive, backed up by the fascists and terrorists of the right sector, Pravi Sektor, of Yarosh and company, and the late Muzichka, he's now a sort of Horst Wessel figure for these people, that this was failing. Not only failing, but that the Kiev fascist forces were being encircled, pocketed, the prelude to a battle of annihilation. In other words, the fascists had been pinned up against the Russian border by the so-called separatist rebels, right? And that is, we'll have a few things more to say about that, but that's the immediate prelude to Malaysian MH17. Back in a minute. Back to our another segment of World Crisis Radio. It's the 18th of July. So, when this week began, there were triumphalistic dispatches in all the Anglo-American NATO media that the days of the anti-fascist rebels, the anti-fascist forces in Ukraine, in the east, in Donetsk and Lugansk provinces, that their days were numbered. They were going to get wiped out. But this looks like Dr. Goebbels putting out stories that Stalingrad was about to fall in December of 1942, and instead it looks like the overextended Kiev fascist Soldateska have been encircled and pocketed by, on the one hand, the anti-fascist pro-Russian rebels, and then they've been pinned up against the Russian border. And you can look at my Twitter feed for this. Dramatic defeat of Kiev fascist forces enveloped between anti-Nazi troops and the Russian border. This comes from websites like Slavyangrad. Slavyangrad, I guess it's a play on Stalingrad. And in particular, the big defeats for the Kiev Soldateska include a place called Izvarnie and other points. And there's also one at this hill. Let's see. Anyway, it's you can see, if you go to my Twitter feed, you can see the actual bombardment of a hill occupied by the pro-Russian forces. But of course, it's not enough to to get them out of there. It's the Saur Mogila, Saurmogila, hill in East Ukraine. Artillery attacks, air attacks, but the pro-Russian forces still hang on. So there it is. The perspective, without some outside event, there was going to be a worldwide prise de conscience, a moment of awareness that these pro-fascists had been overextended and significant amounts of them had been pocketed. Now, the reason that Kiev would be interested in a ceasefire would be to allow those fascists to get out of the encirclements, right? The cauldrons, right? Kesselschlacht, Battaglia nella Sacca, where they had been trapped in the mousetrap, as one of the pro-Russians says, and get out of there. So we'll have to see how that all works. So those, I think, are the important things. The overriding one is the BRICS Bank. This is the event of a century of world monetary history. You may remember there was an attempt to create an Asian development bank based on Japan and the yen during the time of the Asian contagion, about 1998 or thereabouts. And that Asian Monetary Fund would have been most welcome. That would have been an alternative regionally and soon beyond to the IMF and their bankrupt policies, the Washington Consensus, deregulation, privatization, destroy the social safety net, race to the bottom in wages, working conditions, and all the rest. But, of course, the Anglo-American clout was great enough in 1998 to prevent that Asian Monetary Fund from emerging. And now it's the BRICS Bank. We'll try to have some economists and technical experts on in the coming weeks to talk about this BRICS Bank, but you get the idea. It would be urgent to get the BRICS Bank going. I would suggest Egypt as an obvious place to start. You may also want to start with Syria. It's a bit harder to do these things under fire, but if you want to drain the bog and the swamp from which these Islamist characters have been drawing their sustenance, nothing like successful economic development, full employment, jobs, rising standards of living, increased longevity, better public health, improved education, all the things that humanity really cares about, the real human rights that the U.S. stubbornly denies are human rights at all. The U.S. thinks it comes down to voting in a controlled election where CNN and a Washington pollster decide who won. Now, who did it, of course, right? Now, let's also set up the dangers. If we go back to 1914, we will see that World War I did not grow immediately out of the Sarajevo assassinations. In other words, from June 28, 1914, the assassinations, to July 28, 1914, the first declaration of war and mobilization day, that's one whole month. The immediate trigger was not the assassinations themselves, but it was an ultimatum by Austria-Hungary, by the Vienna government, to Serbia, demanding a series of measures designed to prevent terrorism, but also to investigate what had happened. And out of this, I think the ultimatum had 10 or 11 points. Serbia accepted all the points, I think about 10, all but one. And the one point that Serbia rejected was the idea that Austro-Hungarian officials sent from Vienna would come on to the territory of Serbia in Belgrade, and they would go where they wanted and do what they wanted and probe and sift and demand documents and so forth and compel testimony on Serbian territory among Serbian citizens, right? The big question of national sovereignty obviously coming up. It would have been possible to finesse that point. The Serbs said no on that point, understandable. Would have been possible, given the positive answer on 10 points, to avoid war. The person who made sure that war occurred in that this did not stop the drive to war was the Austro-Hungarian Foreign Minister, Count Berchtold, Berchtold, who essentially simply disregarded the positive answer on 10 points and focused only on the negative answer, and then declared war on Serbia. That was, I believe, the 28th of July. Now, as soon as we're talking about an investigation of this plane, who's going to do that investigation? We had people today on National Public Radio, Diane Rehm, saying, oh, it's got to be an investigation that the entire world looks at as credible. And, of course, the most credible are the expert firms in London and in Washington. Well, that is not going to work. And you can see how far from reality these characters are. We can say that 13 years after 9/11, some of us who have labored in that vineyard can say that the gullibility, the willingness of world public opinion to be duped by these false flag or provocation operations, this has declined notably, but still, the Anglo-Americans are still pushing their thing, right? What we say is the truth, and if you disagree, you're a paranoid, of course, a paranoid. Take a look at my book, 9/11 Synthetic Terror, in the 5th edition, and you'll be ready for all of these. So if there's going to be a probe, who's going to do it? National Transportation Safety Board? They have no jurisdiction. Is it going to be the Malaysian authorities? I have to say a word about Malaysians. Let's not, they're being targeted too. This is the country of Mahathir Mohamad, right? The country that did impose capital controls and exchange controls in 1998 and came out of that crisis faster and better than anybody else involved. However, we have to say, if Malaysian 370 in March did not cause a world war, was not worth a world war, then why should Malaysian 17 cause a world war? It's not worth a world war, and this investigation is not worth a world war. The other way you can look at it is we got about 250 Palestinians killed in the past week. No, that doesn't seem to matter at all. But, oh, these people killed on this plane, that's worth World War III. Sorry, not worth World War III. Hashtag no new July 1914. No new July 1914. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. on the afternoon of Friday, the 18th of July. Now, we've looked at the BRICS Bank, and again, I repeat, the casus belli is the BRICS Bank, the attempt to breach the Anglo-American monopoly of International Monetary Fund, World Bank lending, to give people an alternative where destabilization and meddling in the internal affairs of sovereign states will not be the order of the day. And again, forget about sustainable. There are words like sustainable and stewardship that come loaded with Malthusian overtones, right? The sediment, as Derrida would have said, but the not so much the denotation, but the connotation. The connotation is Malthusian, right? That it's going to be windmills. Appropriate technology is what they used to call it. Appropriate means if you're from the third world, you're backward. You get backward, old, useless, non-competitive technology. No, this is going to be the real thing. Again, I recommend Egypt. I recommend a second Nile. I recommend starting the Cape to Cairo Railway or Cairo to Cape Railway across Africa. The Chinese would be delighted. And I recommend the Dakar to Djibouti. And once they cross in the middle, then fix that connection between the Nile and the Congo, make that into a navigable inland waterway system, and you will go far towards opening up Africa to actual modern development. And don't overthrow governments in the process. Rather, work with these governments. Now, we've got the U.S. sanctions that had been imposed during the week. This points up the difficulty that the Malaysian airliner is supposed to solve. On Wednesday, the day before the Malaysian airliner, we have a new round of sanctions. Now, this includes Gazprom Bank. So they don't attack Gazprom, which is the the company, the Russian company that ships gas to Western Europe through the Nord Stream pipeline down the bottom of the Baltic. That won't be interfered with. There's a pipeline across Belarus. That won't be interfered with. But all the ones across Ukraine will be sabotaged. This is why Putin built Gazprom, built the Nord Stream with the help of Gerhard Schröder of Germany. And Putin was so little interested in blackmailing Ukraine that he built the South Stream, was trying to build the South Stream pipeline with the help of Turkey and Berlusconi. One of the reasons that Berlusconi had to be attacked, and I have to now, parenthetically, as a sidebar, Berlusconi found innocent of the principal thing that was used to drive him out of office. And the reason Berlusconi was driven out of office was not anything about corruption or women or anything of the sort, but that he was a close ally of Putin. He was becoming the lawyer, the advocate for Putin in the councils of the European Union. That's why, people, don't be manipulated, right? Don't be a dupe, because being a dupe in this climate is dangerous for your health. So, Gazprom Bank sanction, not Gazprom per se, but the bank that they work with. Rosneft oil company has been targeted by these sanctions. And the one that I would point, they would also, before we get to the banks now, the second largest gas producer, Novatek, on the Russian side, sanctioned. But the one that I'm interested in most is Vneshekonombank, VEB. VEB is essentially the payments agent for the Russian government. It's a little bit like Bank of New York Mellon was the back office for the TARP, right? The bailout of 2008. VEB does a whole series of operations for the Russian government, and VEB figures prominently in the plans elaborated by Sergei Glazyev, our favorite among the advisors of Putin. So there's also Feodosia Enterprises, a shipping company in the Crimea, and senior Russian officials, some of whom already targeted by the European side. The deputy head of the State Duma, a minister of the Crimean regional government, a commander of the Russian intelligence agency FSB, and a Ukrainian separatist leader. We'll try to get the details on this, right? The Treasury supposedly has a list, but they've got it well hidden. So that is the lowdown on these sanctions. Again, the reason why you want to get an airliner with 150 citizens of the Netherlands on board is that this is obviously to stimulate Western Europe to goad them into joining the sanctions, because the European response to these U.S. sanctions second round was tepid at best. Now, given these sanctions, it's time to implement the Glazyev plan, right? The full Glazyev. We want the full Glazyev. And that means, first of all, exchange controls and capital controls. No more hot money. You got to get government permission to send money in or out. That's essential, even with $100 billion currency fund, which still has to be created and launched. You got to protect your ruble against the Anglo-American attacks, using, above all, credit default swaps. You probably ought to ban credit default swaps in Russia pretty much immediately. Capital controls, exchange controls. The next question is, if the U.S. is attacking you, we have Putin saying the sanctions are evil, and they may take relations between Russia and the West back to the 1980s. Well, let's go back to the 1980s. You want to have, vis-a-vis the U.S., you probably want to have a state monopoly on international trade. Yes, you probably do. But above all, you want to have the threat of defaulting on all money owed to New York and London banks. You want to threaten that, and you want to threaten, as Glazyev has said all these things. Glazyev, among his points, also has the idea of dumping the entire portfolio of U.S. Treasury securities, which the Russian Federation currently holds. That is, according to some estimates, 200 billion, 300 billion. Could be a little bit more. I would actually guess something like 500 billion, but it's difficult to determine. Some of that in government hands in Russia, some of it in private or state-owned company hands. And then, of course, the big one, the central bank, Nabulina, has to be either brought on board or replaced. Nabulina has not been going along with the program, but the idea would be the Russian central bank would abandon its current policy of being a satellite of the U.S. Federal Reserve. The Russian central bank, as Glazyev has pointed out, only creates new rubles when they have dollars in the vault. And that is essentially the dollar reserve standard, right? That's the reserve standard of Bretton Woods post August 15th, 1971. And then you got to get out of that. You've got to start issuing your own ruble-denominated loans at very, very low interest rates, as close to zero as you can get, and that has to go for infrastructure, foreign trade, financing. It has to go for manufacturing, agriculture, mining, forestry, scientific research, and so forth. So there we go with the full Glazyev. And that's what I think may now have a possibility of being realized. The point is, we've had the sanctions now. We've had one round of sanctions, and we've now had a second round of sanctions. There's even pressure to get the Europeans into the sanctions. And hopefully, the fact that the U.S. is behaving in this way should strengthen the hand of the Glazyev-Putin faction as against Medvedev, Kudrin, Greff, and these pro-Western, pro-IMF liberals. That's what we have to hope for inside Russia. Back in a minute. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. Now, having dealt with the new Sarajevo, the July 1914 issues, and related stuff, we have a few more things on Ukraine. We want to talk about the madman Netanyahu and his invasion of Gaza. But let's switch now to our domestic struggle fronts, and in particular the activities of the Tax Wall Street Party. This includes a candidate for governor of New York State, Randy Credico, and right now our main topic for today is going to be Dan Burdorf, candidate for U.S. Senate in Nebraska. We have Daniela Walls, and I'd like to ask Daniela, can you give us the update on Credico very briefly, and then go on to talk about Dan Burdorf?
Very briefly, as you say, we're on tenterhooks for the next week. He turned in 19,400 ballot signatures, and the requirement, the minimum was 15,000. He turned in 19,400. The requirement is 15,000. So, we need that buffer, like we've had to deal with in the past. They count every signature, so we're waiting to see if we're going to be challenged by the Cuomo camp, who have been threatening to challenge us, but we haven't heard yet, and we have 1 week to go. So I'll give you the results of that next week. How's that sound?
Okay, and people should turn to my Twitter there, Webster G. Tarpley on Twitter, and I will try to put up any developments as soon as I possibly can. All right, so that's critical.
So
now let's go on to Nebraska.
Okay, so we're pretty much finished in District 1 and 2 collecting our ballot signatures. We're going to finish up District 2.
And that means, for those of us who are not from Nebraska, District 1, I take it, is Omaha or Lincoln?
No. District 1 is Lincoln. District 2 is Omaha.
Okay. So those are done.
So now, District Omaha will be done. We're building our buffer this weekend. We have the minimum, so we're building the buffer until Monday. So starting Monday, we're going to District 3. And District 3 is the big one, and it's mostly all rural. So it's going to be the most amount of work, a lot of driving, and it's going to take a lot of resources. We're going to have to put as many people as we can in District 3 in a short period of time to get as many signatures as possible to meet the requirements and hopefully give ourselves the same adequate buffer. So we're going to need resources for that. So if people can contribute, please visit danfornebraska.com, danfornebraska.com. And at the moment, we're just barely getting by on the resources that we have, and the 3rd District is so much land to cover. So that means that we're going to have to do so much more. We're going to have to spend more on gas. We're going to need lodging for a few nights so we don't have to come all the way back to Lincoln every night. And, of course, food. We need to disperse our teams. We have several teams now, so we need to disperse them into different rural locations. There's only a few populated areas, so we need to get them. Everybody's dispersed. And I can't, like I said already, I can't stress how vast this area is to cover. It's going to be a couple of different cars going to different towns each day, and there's just so much land to cover. We're going to try to go to the most densely populated areas of District 3, but any densely populated areas in this district are hours apart from each other. District 3 makes the majority of the 400 to 500 mile stretch from east to west Nebraska. Geographically, it makes up about 3/4 of the state. So this is the biggest hurdle we've had so far, and it's going to be really hard. So having the resources now is what is just vital. There's just no way we're going to be able to do it without having resources to do it. So again, if you could please consider making a donation at this time at danfornebraska.com, that would just be wonderful. And,
or joining in the effort, right? You can contact the campaign through danfornebraska.com and come and join in, right?
Us, yeah. You're joining us. You're not just donating blindly. You're joining us, yeah. Everybody who's donated so far is part of our team. And, so I said, the point is we're just going to be, basically, to give an overview, we're just going to be burning an incredible amount of gas, Webster. It's like $50, to fill up the car, and we're going to have to fill up each car every day, and that's going to be expensive, but we're so close to the goal is the point, and this is really, really doable. Wherever we go on the street, people are enthusiastic to sign up. People are believing in the program. They think it makes sense wherever we've been going. Part of this campaign was to test this platform on the ground, and it has been really, really turning heads and giving people a lot of optimism. District 3, where we're going, is going to be the reddest of the red part of Nebraska, and it's going to be exciting to talk about the program there in an area where people might not have heard this kind of stuff in the last, kind of ideas in the last 50 years or so. So this is bringing it back to the roots of the Populist Party and the People's Party in Nebraska.
Very good. And I say, in addition, there's a foreign policy aspect that this is the heart of isolationist America. They're not interested in World War III for Ukraine or Malaysia or any other distant cause. Let me just ask you one thing briefly. The Democrat, Domina, we've been getting reports that he's mimicking some of the language of Dan Burdorf, although obviously avoiding the substance, but trying to sound a little bit more like Dan.
Well, exactly. I mean, the interesting and the good news is that Domina is already being pushed to the left by our campaign. He's gone from being a conservative Democrat to a progressive Democrat in a couple months, Webster. But we need him to go further than that. We need him to actually stand for specific policy reforms. It's a good start, but we need to increase the pressure, and part of that is becoming, a serious threat to his voter base. So we need to that's why we need to get on the ballot and get the exposure to reach out to his voters. It's clear that Dave Domina and his camp, it's clear to his camp and Dave Domina now that they have no chance of winning unless he becomes a New Deal Democrat. And I don't think that any other Democratic, to say other Democratic candidates in this country are looking at this now the same way that they looked at de Blasio's win. Like de Blasio, who told Randy to his face that it was Randy who pushed him to the left when we ran Randy for mayor. And Domina now is coming further to the left than de Blasio ever did. De Blasio only came left on, stop and frisk. But, now we know that was all a lie and rhetoric, and we knew that from the beginning. But, the point is he did put some ideas out there. And also, de Blasio had his faulty tax the rich scheme, which yielded nothing. But Domina is coming left on the economic platform. And we're going to force him to radicalize, which is going to radicalize his voter base. So this is actually going to make this race about issues.
Very good. This is how you change the political culture, and the Tax Wall Street Party is doing it. Just give us another summary of how to get in touch and how to help.
Okay, contact danfornebraska.com and contribute so you can help us just get through this last 3rd district. Like I said, we're so close. And right now is when we need your help. And if you're going to come visit, please do it now. And if you can donate, please donate now. Do we have another section?
And what we have is about, 10 days, 12 days before the deadline?
It's the 18th, so we have 12 or 13 days, yeah.
Okay, so if you're going to help us now, this is the time to send in those contributions, or indeed take a vacation in the heartland.
Mm-hmm. So, and then take a vacation in the heartland. Come out if you possibly can. We have places for you to stay. And so, just some anecdotes, if we have a little more time about
go right ahead.
What Domina going to the left. So he has this new meme on his website, Webster, that says, "You pay your fair share, Wall Street should too." He's completely mimicking us, word for word on every issue. He says that he's going to fight, he's going to make Wall Street pay, he's going to build infrastructure, and I highlight the word saying. This is not that he's not doing it the way de Blasio didn't do anything when he got into office that he promised, but he's saying it, okay? So he said, but the thing is, he's saying you pay your fair share, Wall Street should too. But and his answer is close the carried interest tax loophole for hedge funds. I don't even know what that means.
No, that's fine. It's fine as far as it goes. This simply means that hedge fund profits are taxed at a capital gains rate. So you're getting speculative capital profits, but it goes down to a capital gains rate. But of course,
Nebraska.com. Please, thank you.
We'll see you again next week, Daniela. Thank you so much.
Yes, I'll be back. Bye-bye.
Tax Wall Street Party. Daniela Walls. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We've just heard from Daniela Walls of the Tax Wall Street Party, and now we're going to go to Omaha, Nebraska, to Dan Burdorf, candidate for the United States Senate for the Tax Wall Street Party in Nebraska. Dan is out fighting hard to get the signatures needed to get on the ballot against those two plutocratic Wall Street parties, Ben Sass for the Republicans and Domina for the Democrats. And Dan, we understand you're getting sincere imitation, the sincerest form of flattery from at least your Democratic Party rival. But give us an update.
That's correct. And, I wanted to talk to you about that, and I wanted to actually mention something about sacrifice before I do. I wanted to
Please do.
Say hello to Adam Rodriguez and Randy Credico, who are two guys who have carried this program before me. And Adam is carrying our program in Pennsylvania right now, preparing for the 2016 election cycle, and he has given up a lot already, professionally and personally. I want to give a call out to him, and of course Randy Credico and his success in New York. I also wanted to say thank you to my volunteers on the ground and the volunteers nationwide who are helping us, and the many donors who have been contributing $25, $50, $100. We don't have a giant pack helping us or sending us millions of dollars. And I want to tell you, Webster, we will meet our minimum requirement for ballot access signatures in District 2 today. Today, Friday, we will meet that minimum requirement. Then we will move west again to finish District 3. That's the western part of Nebraska. And this is a very exciting and busy time in our campaign, but it's worth it if we can spread our program based on what worked from the New Deal and New Frontier. And as you said before, our opponents, they have attempts to mimic our platform and our populist message, but that's just encouraging us to keep fighting, since we actually have a realistic way to pay for a 21st century infrastructure. And we will keep pushing forward with our fighting program to restore America. And you can see that at danfornebraska.com, and you can check the program there for my program on what we're doing to restore America. I'm the only Nebraska Senate candidate with a plan on how to pay for rebuilding the country's infrastructure. And candidates who are mimicking my platform are missing key features. And Dave Domina, he agrees with me. He's the Democratic candidate. He agrees with me that we must rebuild our nation's infrastructure, but he doesn't go after the Federal Reserve to pay for it. So our Janet Yellen, she says that she feels our pain, but the Federal Reserve they're not using their power of credit stimulus to ease our pain. So I wonder how Domina is different from Janet Yellen. And what's Mr. Domina's plan to pay for a nationwide infrastructure program? Is he going to add to the national debt? Is he going to borrow from China? The federal Reserve uses a credit stimulus when they want to, just like they bailed out the banks when they wanted to.
Right.
So they're not doing that for us now. And I want people, please support me as I demand that they use the power that they have in the Federal Reserve to rebuild our economy and our country. I have real solutions, not just pale imitations. And you can see those at danfornebraska.com.
We've had Obama going around this past week, standing in front of bridges and other, collapsing infrastructure. 60,000 bridges across the U.S. need to be rebuilt, and some of that can come through a Wall Street sales tax, 1% on all transactions, and the rest of it, obviously, through getting the Federal Reserve to cough up 0% 100-year credit. So it doesn't sound like Domina is doing anything much. It's nice to treat carried interest as actual income, wage income, because that's what it is. But that, unfortunately, is not a big enough category. We can assume that the derivatives are now approaching 1.5 quadrillion, probably closer to 2 quadrillion at this point, and he doesn't seem to have anything to say about that.
I didn't see anything to say about that, and I didn't see anything to say how he wants to plan for an upgrade to the nation's infrastructure, although he cites the American Society of Civil Engineers call for rebuilding the infrastructure. Although he's just looking for $2.2 trillion to pay for that. The American Society of Engineers are calling for closer to $4 trillion, but Mr. Domina has no way to pay for that. Of course, I have the Federal Reserve plan to pay for that with with zero interest 100-year bonds. And, of course, as you just mentioned, the 1% Wall Street sales tax is something that I'm championing every day. And I want to thank you very much, Webster, for having me on your show so that I can talk about
Absolutely, Dan. We want you back every week. Let me just ask you one thing now. We have Ukraine right now. I can imagine that people in Nebraska are not interested in meddling in affairs about plane crashes or rebellions in faraway countries with fascist governments on the other side of the world. You have any response about that? Wouldn't it be time to challenge SAS and Domina to repudiate any escalation of this situation, that this is not worth World War III, primarily?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Webster, because I just received notice in the last few days that I've been welcomed to a major debate in western Nebraska on next month at the end of August. So I'm very excited to get there. The only way I can stay in this debate is if I get on the ballot, and that's why I'm pushing in Districts 2 and Districts 3 this week and next. And I desperately need help to keep this campaign going in western Nebraska and here in Omaha. And I have, as you can imagine, I'm out on the street every day. I haven't been able to, I've been doing my best to stay up with the Ukraine situation. I don't want to make a comment on that right now, but I know that the people of Nebraska are not interested in another war, whether it's in the Middle East or in Europe. And I can speak to that very clearly and very concisely. Nebraskans aren't interested in another war. And I think Mr. Sass and Mr. Domina and the other candidates who are running need to address that as well. And I hope to have a chance to challenge them on that in August next month at the Cattlemen's debate in western Nebraska.
Tremendous.
But, I want to tell you something, Webster. Yesterday, we had a great day adding 300 signatures to our total with a team of 4 people, including Thomas Mars, a history student who is a listener to your program, Webster, Joe Johnson, a founding member of UFAA, Danny Sullivan, a local Omaha activist and organizer, and I joined them, and we had a really great time meeting people, talking about the platform on which I'm running. All of us are improving the way we talk about this platform, and we're connecting to the good people of Nebraska and to their populist roots in a very realistic ways. And I'm thrilled that I can be a message for this platform. And we're really learning innovations on how to connect with people and connect people to this platform, and it is really working. And I think the things that we learn here on the ground are going to carry us throughout this election cycle when I'm on the ballot and into 2016. And I encourage anyone listening who is a young person, like some of the volunteers that I have working for me, start thinking now about what you're going to do in the future, because this is the way to develop leaders. And we need to have that help right now.
Okay, Dan, thank you so much. DanForNebraska.com, contributions and volunteers. And we'll see you next week. All right, now, the next segment here of World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley, it's the 18th of July. And now a couple of these more technical points. Once again, total rundown, Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. And that's where you should be looking as the crisis unfolds, right? And follow that. Get it sent to you automatically. Now, two sides to this question. Who did it, right? The investigation, right? The Count Berchtold Sarajevo phase. On the one hand, the warmongers claim now that they have tapes of Russian irregular forces, right? Russian rebels, pro-Russian defense forces, pro-federalization, anti-Kiev, anti-fascist, whatever you want to call them, talking to Russian controllers about what happened. And it's interesting, the best they can do is to present this as a mistake. Now, the mistake part, let's just sidebar this. On the one hand, the Kiev fascist regime declared a no-fly zone on July 8th. No airplanes should have been there. And then we're even told, everybody knows that the rebels had captured high-powered, heavy-duty, high-altitude surface-to-air missiles. They say the Buk, that is the Grumble, or S-300, I think is what they have in mind. The problem is, once you knew that, dear directors of human destiny, why didn't you reroute all aircraft out of Ukraine? Right? Wouldn't that have been a good idea? Then no mistake could have occurred. But the real argument, of course, is much stronger. It's not just a mistake. I recommend that you go to antiwar.com, and this is now the blog of Justin Raimondo, a well-known quasi-mainstream libertarian figure. And his article, posted July 18th, audio proof in quotes, audio proof of Ukrainian rebel responsibility for Malaysian flight downing is fake. Fake. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, fake. And the principal argument here, this is not a text. It is a video. You can get to this directly through my Twitter feed, right? Go to Webster G. Tarpley. I put this out on the Twitter earlier this afternoon, right before the show started, or in the throes of beginning it. It's all up there. Justin Raimondo of Anti-War argues that alleged rebel tapes proving guilt for MH17 shootdown were posted before the incident. Fake. And then the link. So just click on that. And the argument is that the tape was posted before the incident occurred. The tape, it's just like Ghouta, it's just like Syria, where the videos, some of them were posted before the incident was alleged to have occurred. So they had everything going. They were so assiduous, they outsmarted themselves. They were too clever by half. They put it up there, and he's got a date. Now, according to the person making this tape, but we can assume that antiwar.com stands behind it, right? And this is not some fly-by-night crackpot thing. It has a certain institutional force. The person making the tape says this has now been taken down. In other words, the Kiev fascists or their supporters see now that they got ahead of themselves. According to what I can see, and that this is just a quick look that I gave it this morning, it looks like the tape was published the night before. And then they'll say, well, that's California time. Fine. It's still published, posted many, many hours before the incident was supposed to have taken place. The incident is generally assigned to approximately midday, thereabouts, right? Midday European time. Actually, it's maybe more like 3 or 4 o'clock European time on a Thursday. And this is looks like it's 7 o'clock the night before. I don't care what time that is. 7 o'clock the night before will not do it. It was posted in advance, so it's a fraud. Okay, so shoot that down. And of course, Kerry and Samantha, her loopiness, and others will be going wild over this tape. Of course, they've been burned by tapes, right? Victoria Nuland, I'm sure, will be out there arguing for the tape. Now, on the other side of the ledger, we have the case of a Spanish air traffic controller at the Borispol airport in Kiev. And this you can also get through Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. It's all there. It's encyclopedic. It's comprehensive. Here we have the story coming from the control tower of Kiev Airport. The guy's putting out tweets talking about how the Ukrainian military took control of the air traffic control facility in Kiev at 10:25 in the morning. The Malaysian plane disappears from the radar, and then at 10:30 in the morning, avión deribado no accidente. Plane shot down, no accident, and goes through this. And he sent this out as Twitter's. Now, this person exists, and you can see this also through my Twitter account. You can find that he was interviewed by RT. This is somebody known as Carlos, a real person who was interviewed in May talking to RT Spanish language service concerning the general political climate of Ukraine, where he says his view is it's impossible for East and West Ukraine to coexist in the same country because, as he says, el odio, the hatred is so strong between these regions. And, of course, the Kiev fascist regime is all Lvov, Lviv, Lemberg, Leopold. So that, I think, is this is the evidence that makes sense. And here's a real person standing behind it, not a tape, but somebody who could be interviewed. Now, of course, there's an interesting dualism right there. So we have to have an investigation which is considered credible by the world, and, of course, that means London and Washington. Well, dear people, 9/11 did not come and go completely in vain. People are now very skeptical about the Anglo-Americans. Now, let's just try to tick off some other interesting topics. Now, we've heard that Yellen is a fool, right? Yellen says she's using all of her tools. She's not using them. She's Bernanke in a camouflage suit. The interesting thing here is that the Federal Reserve is now reducing the quantitative easing 3 purchases of rotten derivatives, and they're going to reach zero purchases, zero support operations for derivatives in the month of October, just in time for the classic season of stock market panics and related stuff. So, Tarpley for Fed head, Tarpley for Fed head, Tarpley for Fed head. Now, the other one is the Export-Import Bank. We're going to have to increase the satire. It's not enough to show these characters like Jeb Henserling in their Mao suits and Mao hats. We've also got to portray them in French berets with striped shirts and Gauloise cigarettes hanging from lower lip, and also Tyrolean hats and lederhosen, because the entire panoply of foreign interests are represented. Case in point, the Mercatus Center at George Mason University, money from Koch Brothers funding, on the reactionary pedant radio program this past week of John Batchelor. This is now Véronique de Rugy, D-E-R-U-G-Y, Véronique de Rugy. And Véronique de Rugy comes on the radio and says, "Oh, my dear American friends, the Exim Bank, she is against the free marché. You should not do this. We would never do this." Yeah, you have COFAS credits, credit guarantees. Germany has Hermes credits, and it's time to pass the legislation for the Export-Import Bank. Boeing is now appealing to Congresswoman Kathy. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. This is now our final segment for the July 18th program. We were hoping to get Reverend Pinckney on the line. He's at a demonstration in Detroit. He says with quite a few thousand people. One of the issues that may come up there is that Americans are being deprived of drinking water, of potable water in their homes. This is a genocidal public health violation flourishing under the fascist yoke of the governor there, Rick Snyder, the guy who drove Gateway Computer into the ground. If you have Gateway Computers from the last years of that company, you'll know what I mean. Gateway was fine in the 90s, but then once Rick Snyder came on the scene, he drove it into the ground. It no longer exists. So I hope we'll get a report from Reverend Pinckney next week. We tried to get him, but here we are now. As I said, the mobilization of these dubious foreign forces, right? They have a French woman, not even a French woman, but a French noblewoman, that D.E., right? You can be Véronique Rougy, okay? Véronique de Rougy means you're a nobleman. You are a feudal aristocrat. And she seems to be a creature brought over by the Koch brothers to George Mason University, funded by them, and then the Mercatus Center, which is a center for ideological poisons, anti-union, anti-labor, anti-American. And we can see it. The oligarchy prefers its own interests to the national interest, and there we have it. So Boeing is appealing to a congresswoman. Won't she please step up to the plate? And, of course, this is the congresswoman, Kathy McMorris Rogers, Republican, right? She comes from the eastern part, the interior, not the coast of Washington State. This Kathy McMorris Rogers, you've seen her. She's a Republican member of the House leadership there with Boehner and the rest of them. And she even gave the answer to one of Obama's State of the Union addresses. And, of course, if Boeing is not able to sell their airliners on the international market because, of course, the Chinese Export-Import Bank, the French COFAS, the German Hermes system, and so forth are formidable competition, then the entire revenue picture for the state of Washington will collapse, and that will be bad for District 5, represented by Kathy McMorris Rogers. So don't go for the French the arguments of Véronique de Rougy, a true American populist, deeply rooted in the middle America. No, I'm sorry. So it's Mao hats, French berets, and Tyrolean hats with the little Edelweiss feather clip or whatever. We should be dressing up the Republican leadership in these costumes. Now, the highway bill passed, but with the pension gouging element involved, right? Dave Camp, I think, outgoing money man for the GOP, is now building some highways, good, fixing some bridges, okay, but looting pensions to do it. Sorry, no. Tax Wall Street 1%, and seize the Fed, get 1%, get 0% credit for other forms of infrastructure. Concerning immigration, this debate is depraved. Many participants show degeneracy and decadence. The main premise that you've got to keep in mind is people are wealth. There is no more important, elementary, basic form of wealth in human society than people themselves. As any reasonable economics approach would show you, the first approximation of economic development is an increase of the population at the same or increased standard of living. Obviously, you want to increase the standard of living. So all of that going on. And let's also say a few things about the Civil War anniversary. Last weekend, once I had finished taping the show, I went down to Fort Stevens and took part in the Civil War historians roundtable. I was just a spectator. Tried to point out to them that there was a great unsatisfied demand for more information about the foreign policy aspects of the Civil War, right? And I thank everybody again for making my Russian fleet's tape on C-SPAN, the second most viewed Civil War tape ever of all time, the most popular since 2001, and the most popular of those who take the pro-Northern position. Now, let's say a couple of things about this. When you go down to Fort Stevens, if you're coming from the north, right, from the Beltway, you go by the former Walter Reed Army Hospital on the right. That's a tragic thing that was shut down. Obviously, this was helped along by muckraking by the Washington Post. They focused on the motels on the left side of the street, not on the superlative facility on the right side if you're going south. But then you see this other thing, this cemetery, Battleground National Cemetery. The cannon are out in front. And it turns out this is the resting place for 41 Union defenders of the Capitol. And this was dedicated by Abraham Lincoln, that the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Gettysburg is not the only one. That was, of course, in November 1863. But then in July 1864, Lincoln personally dedicated the Battleground National Cemetery a mile or so north of Fort Stevens. And this is an important thing to visit, that Lincoln was there. Little is known about what he said. It might have been a quick formula saying, I hereby dedicate this ground as a national cemetery for the defenders of Fort Stevens and of Washington in general. But there it is. Now, in the debate here on the 10th, right, the National Park Service, I think, has been doing the best they could, and on the whole, a pretty good job on the Civil War anniversary. This was the best debate, and I'll tell you why. This was in that tent. We had the following participants, if I can find it here in my... No, it's Benjamin Franklin Cooling, right? He is the great expert in Early's Raid, Harper's Ferry, the Battle of Monocacy, the Battle of Fort Stevens, and the Washington forts. Anyway, we also had Robert K. Sutton, the chief historian of the National Park Service, and, most interesting to me, Frank Smith of the African American Civil War Memorial and Museum. I call your attention to this. The good thing about this debate was that out of all of the ones that I've been at this year, it's the one with a black community, black historians, black people in general were present. This is a big problem. You go to Gettysburg, lily white, generally speaking. Almost nobody black goes to these monuments, and this came up in the debate. Frank Smith, who is, again, the founder and the leader of the African American Civil War Memorial and Museum, said the problem with American Civil War studies is that the Confederates have owned the narrative for many, many decades, and this is what drives black Americans away from these monuments and, indeed, celebrations. Now, he is proposing to do something about this, and let me urge you to save this date. Frank Smith is the guy who got the African American Civil War Memorial built. Civil War to Civil Rights and Beyond. The Spirit of Freedom. And that is located in the Shaw community of Washington, D.C. Now, he's going to organize the repeat. Remember, at the end of the Civil War, there was the Grand Army of the Republic March. Army of the Potomac, Army of Tennessee under Sherman marched down up Pennsylvania Avenue. May 17th, 2015. May 17th, 2015, the repeat, the sesquicentennial closing march and parade. This time, however, blacks will not be barred as they were the previous time. Blacks will be prominently invited, and this will be an integrated march. So take the narrative away from those Confederates and support the efforts of Dr. Frank Smith, who, by the way, is an old member of SNCC. SNCC, of course, the organization that sent the civil rights activists to Mississippi 50 years ago this summer. That was the Mississippi summer, and he's still active. More power to him. See you next week on World Crisis Radio.